The wrong number. It began with a phone call. Nothing special, just an ordinary moment that spiraled into something I still can't explain. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, around 8 p.m. I was slouched on the couch, half watching a sitcom rerun I'd seen a dozen times, scrolling aimlessly on my phone. The buzz of an incoming call broke through the monotony. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but for some reason I answered. Hello? Silence. Not static, just an intentional, deliberate quiet. Then a voice, faint and distant, as if coming from the bottom of a deep well. Is this Sarah? I frowned. No, you've got the wrong number. The pause on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, the voice responded, hesitant. Are you sure? That made me hesitate too. Yeah, I'm sure. Sorry. I hung up, an uneasy feeling creeping in. A few minutes later, the phone buzzed again. Same number. I let it ring this time, watching the screen until it stopped. A voicemail notification popped up almost instantly. Against my better judgment, I hit play. Sarah, the voice murmured, more insistent now. Why aren't you answering? You said you'd help me. Please, don't leave me here. A chill prickled at the back of my neck. I deleted the voicemail, convincing myself it was just some distraught stranger who dialed the wrong number. These things happen, right? But it didn't stop there. The next day at work, the same number called again. I ignored it, declining the call mid-meeting. But moments later, my phone buzzed with another voicemail. I waited until I was home to listen. This time, the voice wasn't distant. It was urgent. Sarah, you promised. I can't do this alone. You have to come back. A knot tightened in my stomach. I wasn't Sarah. I didn't know this person. Why wouldn't they stop? That night, I dreamed of a woman. She stood in the middle of a dark, deserted street, her face pale and unfocused, like an overexposed photograph. Her shoulders shook with soundless sobs, and when she looked up at me, her eyes were nothing but dark, hollow voids. I woke up drenched in sweat, my breath coming in gasps. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen glowing with that same number. I snatched it up, my nerves frayed. Listen, I snapped. I don't know who you are or who you're looking for, but you've got the wrong person. Stop calling me. Silence. A beat. 2. Then a whisper. You're lying. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I'm not... You said you wouldn't leave me. The voice interrupted, louder now, tinged with anger. You promised to help me, Sarah. I'm not Sarah, I yelled, slamming the phone down. But the calls didn't stop. Over the next few days, they came at random times, morning, lunch, midnight. The voicemails grew more frantic, the voice more desperate. Why are you doing this to me? I need you, Sarah. Please. It's so dark. It's so cold. By Friday, I was unraveling. My coworkers noticed. My boss pulled me aside, concerned. I lied, saying I hadn't been sleeping well. The truth was, I was terrified. That night, another call came. This time, when I answered, the voice was different, deeper, harsher, and laced with something. Inhuman. Sarah's dead. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My throat went dry. What? Sarah's dead, the voice repeated. Slow and deliberate. And you're next. I dropped the phone, my chest tightening with panic. Call the police? What would I even say? That I was getting threatening calls from some ghostly voice? They'd think I was crazy. At 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom door. My blood turned to ice. I lived alone. Hello? I called, my voice shaking. The footsteps stopped. Then the doorknob turned. I grabbed my phone, whispering to the operator that someone was in my apartment. Seconds stretched into eternity as I stared at the door, waiting for it to open. But it never did. When the police arrived, they found nothing. No forced entry. No signs of anyone. My phone lay on the nightstand, screen glowing with a new voicemail. The officer stayed as I played it on speaker. The voice was calm now, eerily composed. Why'd you call them? They can't help you. No one can. I dropped the phone. My stomach churned as one of the officers picked it up, frowning. Miss, there's nothing on this voicemail, he said. That's not possible, I stammered. You just heard it. The second officer played it back, holding up his recorder. Static. Just static. My skin crawled. The officers left, telling me to lock my doors. I didn't sleep that night, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for the phone to buzz again. It didn't. For a while, I pretended things were back to normal, but everything felt off. Strangers stared at me too long. The air in my apartment grew heavy, oppressive. One evening, the phone buzzed again. The number wasn't the same. It was a string of zeros. Against my better judgment, I answered. What do you want from me? The voice was distorted now, layered with static. 100 voices speaking as one. You lied. You said you'd help her. I don't know Sarah, I screamed. You're lying again, it hissed. The lights flickered and the air turned icy. A whisper came from behind me. She's here. I spun around, knife raised, but the room was empty. My phone clattered to the floor, still connected. Across the room in the darkened TV screen, I saw her reflection. Not mine. Hers. The pale woman from my dream, her hollow eyes boring into me. Her mouth moved soundlessly, but I felt the words. The lights went out. The air pressed down on me, suffocating, and the whisper returned, echoing all around me. Sarah lied. Sarah lied. Sarah lied. I screamed, banging on the door until it finally gave way. My neighbors stared wide-eyed. Are you okay? She glanced past me into the apartment, her face draining of color. Don't go back in there, she whispered. Whatever you brought in, it's not leaving. I didn't. I moved out the next day, leaving everything behind. The calls stopped for a while. But sometimes in the dead of night, I feel my phone vibrate, even when it's off. I don't answer anymore. But last week, a voicemail appeared. The number? Zeros. I deleted it without listening. Or at least I thought I did. Because now, when I'm alone, I hear it again. And it's not asking for Sarah anymore. It's asking for me. The town that sleeps before 10 p.m. I live in a town where everyone sleeps before 10 p.m. It's not just a habit, it's a rule, an unspoken law etched into the fabric of our lives. By 9:45, doors are locked, lights are off, and every soul retreats to bed as if their survival depends on it. Even the stray dogs vanish, leaving the streets eerily quiet. As a kid, I asked my parents, why does everyone sleep so early? That's just the way it's always been, they'd reply, brushing off my questions. It wasn't enough for me. Why had it always been this way? What made 10 p.m. so significant? The silence of our nights always felt unnatural. No one ever woke up for anything. Not for water, not for a midnight snack. Once they closed their eyes, they were gone. As if sleep was a spell that couldn't be broken. I remember hearing whispers between adults once. Just fragments of a hushed conversation. He stayed awake, one voice had said, tense and frightened. He didn't wake up again. They stopped talking the moment they noticed me listening, but the curiosity had already taken root. What happened if you stayed awake past 10 p.m.? I decided to find out. That night, I followed my usual routine. Dinner at 7, TV until 9, then bed. But instead of sleeping, I lay perfectly still, listening. At exactly 10 p.m., the house fell silent. The kind of silence that feels alive, heavy and watchful. I waited. Minutes passed like hours, and then I opened my eyes. The air felt different. Thicker. Colder. My heartbeat echoed in my ears as I sat up, moving carefully to avoid the creak of the mattress. I tiptoed to my bedroom door, opening it just enough to peek into the hallway. It was empty, bathed in shadows. Slowly, I crept to my parents' room. They were asleep, their breathing deep and even, faces calm and undisturbed. For a moment, I stood there watching them. Then, as I turned to go back to my room, I felt it. A presence. It wasn't something I could see or hear, but I knew it was there. The air grew colder, pressing down on me, and every instinct I had screamed at me to run. And then I heard it. "Why are you awake?" The voice was low, sharp, and close. My throat tightened, and for a fleeting moment I thought, "It's Mom. It has to be Mom." But then I saw her. My mother was still in bed, motionless, breathing softly. Asleep. The voice came again, louder, angrier. "You were supposed to be asleep." I turned slowly, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every other sound. And that's when I saw it. It wasn't human. The figure towered over me, impossibly thin, with skin stretched tight over its skeletal frame. Where its face should have been was only a swirling black void. "You should have stayed asleep," it hissed, its voice cutting through me like ice. Terror surged through me, and I ran. My legs felt heavy, my breath came in ragged gasps, but I didn't stop until I slammed my bedroom door shut. The pounding started immediately. The door shook violently under the force of it, and I pressed my body against it, tears streaming down my face. Then, as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. Silence. For what felt like hours, I stayed there, trembling, waiting for whatever it was to return. When nothing happened, I thought it was over. I opened the door, and that's when I realized something was wrong. The house was the same, yet different. The walls looked warped, their colors muted and gray. The air was thick, suffocating, and the clock on the wall caught my eye. Its hands were frozen. It was 10 p.m., and it always would be. I don't know how long I've been here. Days, weeks, years. Time doesn't move anymore. Not in this place. The town is empty now. My parents, my neighbors, gone. The streets are silent, lifeless. I wander aimlessly, searching for a way out, but there isn't one. I should be dead, but I'm not. I don't eat, I don't sleep, and my body, it's changing. I've grown taller, impossibly thin. My skin clings tightly to my bones, and when I catch my reflection in broken glass, I see the truth. My face is gone. It's been replaced by the same void I saw that night. A swirling, endless blackness. I don't feel human anymore. The memories of my life are slipping away, replaced by something darker. Anger. It grows inside me, feeding on my fear and confusion. I hate the town. I hate myself. I hate everything. One night, as I wandered the empty streets, I saw something. A boy. He was small, frightened, creeping through his house just like I had. He peeked into his parents' room, his tiny frame trembling with fear. The sight filled me with rage. "Why are you awake?" I heard myself say, my voice cold and foreign. The boy froze, his wide eyes locking onto mine. And in that moment, I realized the truth. I wasn't watching him. I was watching myself. And now I understand. I stayed awake. And now it's my job to make sure no one else does. I got kidnapped as a kid and still have nightmares. I was only 10 years old when it happened. It was an ordinary day at the park. The same park my mom and I went to all the time. My mom had brought along her friend, and while they sat on a bench sharing a beer, they let me wander off to the swings just a few yards away. The park was always full of people, and I thought nothing of it. It felt safe. I remember him, this tall man with dark hair tucked under a baseball cap. He stood just outside the playground's gate, lingering like he didn't belong but didn't want to leave. He looked lost at first, hesitant. Then, his eyes locked onto mine. He walked over to me with a strange energy I can still feel to this day. A smile that felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate at the time. Softly, calmly, he asked if I knew where the bathroom was. I pointed toward the far side of the park, expecting him to leave, but he didn't. He just stood there watching me, his smile lingering. Then he asked, "Can you show me the way?" At first, I said no, but I'd been raised to be polite, to help people if they needed it. Moments later, I caved and said yes. As I walked ahead, leading him toward the bathroom, I felt his hand brush against my back. Not grabbing, not holding, just a touch. I remember that touch. It was the first moment something deep inside me whispered, "Something is wrong." We reached the edge of the bathroom area, and that's when it happened. His hand clamped down on my wrist, and he pulled me toward the far side of the building, where the trees blocked the view of anyone passing by. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Panic set in, my chest heavy, my breath shallow. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come out. Before I could process what was happening, he shoved me into a truck parked near the trees. It was nicer than I expected. Clean, like it didn't belong to someone who would do something like this. The doors slammed shut behind me, and I just froze. I couldn't think, couldn't cry, couldn't even move. I was numb. But then, everything shifted in an instant. The truck hadn't even pulled away when flashing lights flooded the area. A police car screeched to a stop behind the truck, and everything became a blur. I remember being yanked from the vehicle by a woman police officer, her arms wrapping around me as I collapsed into her. The next thing I knew, I was being brought back to my mom. She was screaming, her voice raw with terror, as were the voices of the people who'd been with her. The world around me felt chaotic, spinning. But one thing was clear. I was safe. Later, I learned more about the man who tried to take me. He wasn't just a stranger. He was a wanted man, someone with a history of rape and murder. I still don't know if his victims were kids or adults, but it doesn't matter. His intentions were pure evil, and if the police hadn't acted so quickly, I might not be here today. That day changed everything for me. The world didn't feel safe anymore, not even in places like parks that used to feel like second homes. I don't go to parks anymore, not alone, and not without a good reason. To this day, I carry mace and a knife with me, even if I'm just going out for a run or heading to the bars with friends. That lingering sense of danger never quite left me. I also want to say something that might be controversial these days. I know there's a lot of negativity surrounding police officers. I see the news like everyone else, and I understand the criticism. But for me, they were there when I needed them most. They saved my life, and maybe my mom's life too, because losing me would have destroyed her. The man was arrested, his horrific past unearthed in the aftermath. But for me, the most important thing is that I made it home that day. It hasn't been easy. I still have nightmares about the park, about his face, about that truck. But I'm here. I'm alive. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Thanks for reading. Stay safe out there. My doppelgänger. It was late, and I'd been lying awake in my bed for about 20 minutes, unable to fall back asleep. The stillness of the night was broken when my mom burst into my room, her face pale, her voice shaky. "Were you just in my bed?" she asked, breathless. Confused, I shook my head. "No, I've been here the whole time." Her expression shifted from bewilderment to something close to fear. She explained that she had woken up moments earlier to the sensation of someone climbing onto her bed. Me. She said she felt my weight settle on top of her, like a child seeking comfort. Even more unsettling, she claimed she could feel the familiar texture of my curly hair brushing against her face. Thinking I'd had a nightmare or was spooked by something, she softly asked, "Do you need more room?" I didn't respond. Instead, I looked up at her, silent, just staring. That's when she started to realize something was off. Normally, I'd answer, even if groggily, but this version of me said nothing. Mum closed her eyes for a moment, trying to shake the eerie feeling. But when she opened them again, or whatever she thought was me, was gone. Vanished. That's when she bolted into my room, only to find me lying there, wide awake, scrolling through TikTok. The fear in her eyes made my stomach twist. She wasn't joking or exaggerating. She was genuinely rattled. And this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Mum admitted that she'd often seen me around the house when I wasn't there. Out of the corner of her eye, she'd catch a glimpse of me sitting on the couch, standing in the kitchen, or walking past the hallway. But whenever she turned to look, I would vanish into thin air. She'd brushed it off as her imagination before, but now, with this encounter in her bed, she wasn't so sure. Hearing her recount these moments gave me chills. Was it just her mind playing tricks on her? Or was someone, imitating me? Whatever it was creepy as hell. To this day, she still sees me sometimes. But now, every time she does, she has to double check to make sure it's really me. And honestly, so do I. The girl at the edge of my bed. I was exhausted that night, completely drained after weeks of restless sleep filled with nightmares and bouts of sleep paralysis. My home has always had an unexplainable energy, like a portal to something unseen. Strange things happen there all the time, ever since I was a kid. But this was different. Finally, I managed to drift off. My arm hung limply off the side of the bed. Then I felt it. A cold hand wrapped around my index finger, so icy that it jolted me awake. Or at least, I thought I was awake. My eyes snapped open, and that's when I saw her. A young girl stood at the edge of my bed, her small, pale hand still gripping my finger. She was wearing a white gown, her skin as white as snow, and her wide black eyes locked onto mine. Long black hair cascaded down her shoulders, framing a face that was both otherworldly and unsettlingly familiar. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there, staring into my soul, her cold grip never loosening. Her expression was impossible to put into words, both unnervingly blank and filled with something ancient, something that didn't belong in this world. My chest tightened as I lay frozen, unable to move or scream. I wanted to yank my arm back, to close my eyes, to do anything but look at her. But I couldn't. And yet, beneath the terror, something stirred in the back of my mind. I knew her. Somehow, in some deep, forgotten part of myself, I had seen her before. Time didn't exist in that moment. It stretched on endlessly as I stared into those impossibly black eyes. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't escape. Then, all at once, I woke up for real. The room was dark and empty. My arm was still dangling off the bed, trembling as I pulled it back under the covers. But the memory of her stayed with me. The cold grip, the pale skin, the hollow stare. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and from that day on, I made sure to never let any part of my body hang off the bed again.